For those who have not been here, I would like to make a brief well, whatever you like. A brief recapitulation of what I have explained. I said this music is not written in musical notes, in scores, but I have written texts, words, actual words. And I have published a little book of compositions which is called From the 7 Days, in German, aus den Sieben Tagen. And each text has a title. For example, today we are going to play Es, it. Think nothing. Warte, bis es absolut still in dir ist. Wait until it becomes absolutely silent in you. Wenn du das erreicht hast, when you have reached it, beginne zu spielen, start playing. Did you get it? Think nothing. Wait until it becomes absolutely silent in you. If you have reached it, there's the it again, start playing. Sobald du zu denken anfängst, höre auf. As soon as you start thinking, stop. Stop playing, I mean. Und versuche den Zustand des Nichtdenkens wieder zu erreichen. And try to reach the state of non-thinking again. Dann spiele weiter. Then continue. Yes.
Talking about time, I think it was very difficult for us who were listening now to say afterwards how long time this piece lasted. Is that your intention?
You mean in correspondence to clock?
Yes, or some other way of...
Yes. The clock time is very close then sometimes to the breathing, or to the heartbeat, which is 70 approximately, or 80. And we have the 60, which is the subdivision of the clock. The clock time is astronomical time. That was a time for everybody. And one by one, very slowly, the musical time has switched from astronomical time to biological time, where it is definitely true that the music is no longer in the time, but the time is in the music. The music itself creates a portion of time and its tempi and its different time layers. That's very close to the modern concept that each being has its own time. And there is no longer a valuable arguing that all the different beings are in the same time. That's ridiculous. It has become ridiculous. There's this famous relativity of time. The time is created by the event. And there is no longer something like an objective time, which is for all the events the same. You see what I mean? That is the main difference. Because, as he said, whenever you hear traditional time, you can subdivide it in periods, in a number of beats per measure. That is quite clear. It all adds up in little boxes, like a clock which runs, no matter how fast or how slow you experience things. And the music that had to be written inside of these boxes of time. There was an objective time, like a physical time. And physics also had worked that way. Whereas biological time is totally different. We have performed very recently, that is just 3 weeks ago, no, it's more, excuse me, almost 2 months or what, 2 months ago, in St. Paul de Vence. Well, 3 weeks ago also the same, it was in Darmstadt, but it was more successful even in St. Paul de Vence. We started playing long before the people arrived. And it was an open air situation in the courtyard of a museum. And we played a piece which is called, one of those pieces which is called Unlimited. And this text says of Unlimited, we are not going to play it here, it says, play a sound with the certitude that you have all the time and all the space. Well, the musicians started playing, as I say, long before the people came in, and there was already a rather solemn sound in the whole area when the first arrived. And they didn't talk like in all the other concerts. There were 8 concerts during the week. They didn't start talking and reading, but they just, it has already started. Are we late? And so they came in, took their place and listened. Because I told the musicians before, if you start before, if you decide to start before, then don't do it too timidly, but just create a musical aura which is present enough. And after about 2 hours, the first of the musicians left by playing. Each of the musicians had additional instruments, and he left into the wood. There were a lot of cedar trees around, and the frogs were there, and everything. It was very naturalistic, also sound environment, which we, or some of the musicians, had already very well integrated while they were playing. So you couldn't even know sometimes if the frogs were making sound, or if he was doing with his viola. And the same thing was true for the tzigal. Those thousands of, and it was full moon night, you can imagine the whole atmosphere. Well then, one by one, the musicians were leaving in different directions in the woods. So the music was more and more disappearing from the place where the people were. So many of the people, I was told later, were asked to stay. No, excuse me, thought we would come back, asked their friends to stay. They might come back. And so they stayed and listened while the sounds were disappearing. But, we had a rather crazy Englishman with us, a singer, and there was one moment where all of a sudden he ran like mad through the whole stadium, just making sounds of strange sounds, and just disappeared again. The people thought, gee, what's going on here? So, but besides that, you heard a tam-tam player with his tam-tam, disappearing more and more, and a saxophone player was over there, and we had several of these car horns, quite a few, and each one had one, and we were giving signals to each other to know if he was still there and where he was. And a trombone player, etc. No, what was it? A bass climber. And he, with his electronium, had a little chariot, and he went away with his, and he had with his electronium even played further away. So it lasted. I, for example, stayed myself. I don't know exactly when the others got back. Well, I asked them. They said they didn't look at the clock. But I knew I stayed very close to the road where the people were leaving, about 80 meters away in the woods. And I had several instruments, small instruments, especially one flute, which permitted me to make sounds like those exotic birds. There were many exotic birds. And so one by one, the people were finally leaving and talking about it, and then they had all to go to the parking place, which was about 1 kilometer further down, so they all had to walk. And so I made my sounds, and they all responded to me. It would make someone would whistle. So they imitated always what I did. So I made, with the same people, more and more complicated melodies. And they sometimes got lost, they started laughing, and I saw them all leaving one by one. And whenever a car was leaving, with my car horn, I made a sign, and they responded. So then the whole concert started at the parking place. They made and the other and that was the way they left. You see, there was a kind of unlimited situation where duration had no meaning. The duration of the performance. Well, we try also this. But here I liked very much what I called the time and the duration that is given by a process that you choose. Yes.
Only a question. What's the difference in your mind between improvisation, regular improvisation with a jazz band,
right,
and with what you're doing
yes,
here with intuitive music?
I have been asked this question many times. I'm very happy you bring it up. You see, the word improvisation immediately rings a bell when you hear it. You think of Indian music, you think perhaps of European Baroque music, where some improvisation was possible on the basis of very particular ornamentations, etc., or even the whole cadences were improvised. And then of the more contemporary jazz, or especially free jazz improvisation. There are certainly several more original improvisation traditions, but that's what we all know. In all those cases, when this bell rings, so to speak, we know there is something at the basis, like the ragas or the tablas in the Indian music, like a certain harmonic and rhythmic, the beat, for example, a system in the free jazz situation. Even if it's called free jazz and you destroy something, you can only destroy something which is very well defined. There is no destruction possible if there is nothing constructively given at the basis. The same is true for the Baroque musicians. Well, nowadays this is no longer in use. Almost all the cadences are written out, and all the books that describe exactly if the trill has to go up, down, or down, up, have totally determined this situation. So that's why I don't like the word improvisation in connection with our work, because we try consciously not to start with a system that is given, not to accept any rhythmic, harmonic, melodic, timbre, whatever formal system which permits us to make variations. I mean that improvisation is basically variation. Sometimes it reaches the point of transformation. Even in the most, in the freest Indian improvisation, for example, I knew the very last attempts of Chatur Lal, the famous tabla player, before he died. And I have the last recording that he made himself. And he tried to improvise on a raga which was for him, well, an extension of his capacities, like in the European tradition, starting 12-tone music. He tried to do to improvise on a raga of a number of 11, which was terrifically difficult. And he tried it, and you hear him humming, and you hear when he says, no, it's wrong, etc. And you hear all that on the recording. That means he had something which he wanted to break through, to go beyond. Well, this is not at all the case. We have no dialectical situation at all when we play. There's nothing we can be against or with, and that's why I call it intuitive music.
But you do have a Western concept of density.
Well, I would say we have the Western music in us like he looks like a European. It is ridiculous even to think or to ask, why doesn't he look like a Japanese, Mr. Kontarski? You say, you do have a European face. And he says, well, naturally, I'm a European man.
But have you tried to improvise with people of vastly differing...
No. I like to work with my friends that I know since many years, and if one day brings us another musician that we consider being a good human element in our group, then it would be certainly fine, an Indian musician. But I doubt it if it will work. I mean, well, let's try, yes, we will try, whenever it comes about. But besides of that, this discussion doesn't bring us anywhere when we say you still have Western. Well, what else?